So this one really is a throwback. I remember playing the original Broken Sword game on my friend's PC, which at the time was sporting Windows 95. So some quick nostalgia for any oldies like me that are watching. So satisfying. Welcome to a really retro review of Broken Sword, shared with the Templars Director's Cut Edition. So I only have one of the two original discs, which meant I had to get a digital version. So I ended up with the Director's Cut Edition released in August 2010 for PC, but thankfully it really isn't all that much different from the original. Actually, that's a lie. The experience of replaying this game so many years later was full of crazy highs and lows, and I'll be explaining that as I carry on. I'm going to break down this review like I do with my others, and start with the story and voice acting, which for some reason I seem to lump together, but whatever. Oh, by the way, this game is super old, but the game features two main characters, good old trusty American George Stobart, who you spend 90% of your game playing as, and the French journalist Nicole Goulard, or as I so frequently thought of her,
Nestlé Toulouse.
Nailed it. So you start out with
Nestlé Toulouse
as you head to the house of Pierre Cauchon to conduct an interview after being personally requested, and this is where all the drama unfolds. The animators originally involved with this game had a crazy talent for creating the creepiest expressions on characters' faces, and they chuck you right in at the deep end from the start.
Choo-choo! All aboard the
Creepy.
train, baby!
First stop, Mr. Mime. Not literally Mr. Mime, but an actual mime. This is France after all. Oh wait, did I not mention that? They're set in Paris mostly, but also... Long story short, the mime kills Cauchon and you begin your brief and honestly semi-pointless adventure with
Nestlé Toulouse.
Okay, I'm going to stop with that joke now. So, I'm not actually sure this section was part of the original game because I honestly don't remember it, and now that I've completed the game again, I still don't remember it. It really didn't seem to have any impact on the story whatsoever, and that's it. Thanks for watching this really retro review. No, I'm joking. Time to welcome our hunky hero, George Stobart, who almost dies within seconds of you first seeing his face because a crazy clown tries to blow him up in the cafe he's visiting. Yeah, that's right. Another creepy face carrying out a crazy act of violence, and we're just getting started. Not drawn into the story yet? Yeah, that's what I thought. You continue from this point with sexy Stobart as you try to identify the clown that almost killed him, only to jump down one of the biggest rabbit holes that gaming had to offer in the 90s. The story itself can only be summarised as a chiselled mess that will have you praising its attention to detail one minute and have you questioning its obvious simplicity the next. A fair amount of research clearly went into the subjects that surround the game to create a real authenticity. I commend the team behind Broken Sword for that, but to create an interactive story that could be played on computer obviously brought around its constraints when it came to the story. There's only so complex and in-depth you can go of a story that requires you to figure out each and every section of the game before it becomes tedious and frustrating. There's too many areas of downtime, which wouldn't keep many games interested nowadays as far as I'm concerned. So yes, the story isn't a flawless masterpiece, and there are awkward pop culture references that are slightly cringeworthy.
She reminds me of the Wicked Queen in Snow White.
Disney!
Who do you suggest? Indiana Jones?
Indiana Jones, so funny! Why? And several other poor and cheesy jokes along with some pretty bad dialogue written in. Still laughed though. However, it is a clever piece of work put together by a small team of people for hardware that wasn't capable of much at the time, so credit where credit is due. If this was a story created for a modern day title, I'd still commend it as it pretty much takes a huge dump on what the game industry has to offer in this particular area at the moment. I don't want to continue to speak too much about the actual details of the story, as I would recommend playing through the game yourself, as it is enjoyable for at least one playthrough, and that's probably all you'll need per decade, to be honest. So, the voice acting. Okay, remember when I spoke about the highs and lows? This is one of them. The voice acting is all over the place, like literally all over the place. 1 minute the voices are dead quiet and completely overpowered by what should be the background but really is the foreground music. And then in the next breath, I've rushed for the dial on my speaker to stop George Stobart's voice from smashing all the cutlery in my house. Why this?
The big story was about the brutal murder of a French media magnate, shot down in cold blood.
To this.
The guy oozed confidence, like a regular French statesman.
They're so close together, it's such a mismatch. And this jumping quality doesn't just apply to the volume of the speech, it applies to the quality as well. Were the vocals recorded during a trip around the world? Some sound like they're recorded on a hot air balloon with a potato, and others sound clear and crisp like they were recorded in a vocal booth last week. Surely this should have been mentioned during the game's testing phase. They had game tests in 1996, right? You don't know. Who knows? Either way, it'll be a while before my unsuspecting eardrums have come to terms with what happened in this game. The actual actors themselves, well, they have the same aforementioned range of quality and consistency. It appears that they've added in voiceovers at specific points in the director's cut version, and the person who plays...
Nestlé
I said I'll stop with that joke. And the person that plays Nicole is different from the person who voices her for the majority of the original game. Either that or the lady forgot how to do a French accent. I don't know if it's the way the voice acting was recorded that has caused these inconsistencies or not, but the emotion in the characters' voices has wild jumps from time to time. On a whole, it's fairly decent considering the size of the project, but by today's standard, and that's the comparison we're doing with these retro reviews, I wouldn't really say the voice acting holds up too well. Maybe if the game was remade with today's technology, it might have come across totally different, but it wasn't, so yeah. The gameplay! Let's start with the controls. There isn't too much to say here as you simply use the mouse for the entirety of the game. Broken sword functions about as well as you'd imagine a point and click game would in 1996. The mouse moves around fine with a little less finesse than you'd probably expect from a modern title, but overall it's very usable. The only aggravation any interaction caused me was mainly when doing the puzzle sections, as sometimes they were slow to respond or just ignored my inputs altogether. And speaking of puzzles, sit back and enjoy me frantically googling the answers to puzzles a fully grown adult with a degree should be perfectly capable of completing. Seriously. Oh. I swear to God I spent up to 15 minutes trying to hurdle over something you'd expect to play on a mobile app. That's more of a dig towards myself than the game really. The puzzles included are actually quite trivial and relevant to the story, not just aimlessly placed in to drag out the gameplay, which is a nice touch. Except this one at the beginning, which is definitely here just to drag out the gameplay. Puzzles such as the chess pieces and the Bible verses in Spain were a clever and nice touch. Thankfully you have a notepad in the director's cut version that documents what you've seen, which I don't remember being present in the original title, so it made remembering countless amounts of information much easier. Either that or you could just do what I used to do. Generally there isn't too much to discuss here as the experience is more of the story than the gameplay, but it just passes as acceptable. Does it hold up by today's standards? Perhaps as a web browser game with an acceptable resolution. Oh yeah, the resolution! This just shows how far we've come. For reference sake, the game is way too blurry to play on full screen mode, so I played in what's called augmented mode, which looks like this. This is pretty tiny to play a game, right? However, the game's original resolution size is this. Look how flipping tiny it is. And I remember playing this on full screen back in the day. Christ. I know it's probably not worth it for the developers, but it would be really nice to see this game get an HD remaster or even better, a remake. Not in 3D though, please, please not in 3D. The game carries a certain charm because it's in 2D, and it's no surprise that the interest in the series did start to dwindle when they made the move over to 3D. Speaking of 2D charm, the graphics! You know what, when I was sitting down writing the script for this review, I did have a few areas I wanted to mention that bugged me, but before I bring them up, I do want to say that the style this game adopted really is something that holds true nostalgia in the gaming industry, and there is now an empty space for something like this to return, perhaps for a console such as Nintendo Switch. Just something to think about, guys. So yeah, the graphics. They definitely have their moments. The static backdrops are often more than impressive. The attention to detail and mix between realism and cartoon is something really quite unique. You have to commend the Broken Sword team for bringing in someone to do this. In fact, believe it or not, the drawings were all submitted to the development team in black and white. It was only later that they added colour using Photoshop, and that must have been quite some task back in 1996. That being said, I do have my issues. For a start, anything that's interactive sticks out like a sore thumb. I know it can't have been easy making objects like that blend in at the time, but it often gave away what you had to do next. Take the visit to Syria for example. When talking to the lad at the stand, you can clearly see the item on the shelf behind him can be interacted with, which made it all the more obvious what to do next, because at certain points you can't interact with that object, so whenever I got stuck I knew that that would be where I had to head next. And to be honest, that's all I can really say that's bad about the graphics, to be honest. Do they hold up today? Hell no. Even remastered into a high resolution, you'd still expect much superior animation now, but I just can't help but reward the idea that went behind making the game look like this. Age and a change in animation style has aged this game more than anything else I can think of. So let's just head for the summary, shall we? The story! 7 out of 10. Really good game for the time, but not without its flaws. The gameplay! 3 out of 10. It's a point and click, there isn't actually much game to play here. The graphics! 5 out of 10. Would love to see something like this now, but it really has not aged well. The Stobart effect! 6 out of 10. Oh George, you charming motherfucker. And the overall is 5.5. This is my second retro review. Thanks for watching, and please support my other videos by leaving a like, sharing them and subscribing, and more content will hopefully be with you soon. Thanks.